Weapons land itself in the very heart of Guild Wars 2's gameplay, dictating a massive chunk of its combat and build diversity. They're also the main selling point of expansions alongside the new content and elite specs, but number of weapons currently in the game is finite, meaning we're eventually going to run out of existing weapons to give to different classes. What's going to happen then? Well, either Arena will have to return to cooking up elite specs or introduce completely new weapons. And because I'm a gigantic HEMA nerd, I contrived a small list of few less known violence utensils that could be interesting additions to Guild Wars 2's weapon roster, or perhaps even Guild Wars 3 if we ever live to see that day. Entries on this list aren't ranked. I am simply showing off weapons that I think are interesting and not commonly enough known. If you like the content, you can support me by subscribing through Patreon or channel memberships. And without further ado, let us begin. Number 5. Chakram. Probably a weapon most people at least heard about. Chakram. It is a weapon originating from somewhere in Indian subcontinent. It can be used as thrown projectile or held in hand as sort of slashing version of knuckle duster, while also there are accounts of them being worn as bracelets to be on hand for self-defense situations. Less commonly known facts about them are that some were shaped specifically to be airfoils, to improve their range as thrown projectiles and reduce the effect of the wind on trajectory of their flight. And also, some had a small part of their edge unsharpened to accommodate for in-hand combat. Neither of these features, however, were universal to all chakrams. To the advantage of Chakram works its simplicity, as it fits every class in the game with little creativity required, and skins for it could be greatly varied, from masterfully crafted weapons through repurposed buzzsaws to pretty much anything that's flat and roughly disc-shaped. Warrior could use those as throwable knuckle dusters, with a focus on stacking bleeds and melee execute that does the more damage, the more bleeding opponent suffers from. Ranger, that's a no-brainer. This thing is essentially an angry frisbee, and I could see it as having an ability or two that fire a projectile that lands on the ground and can be retrieved by a player or the pet to reduce the skill's active cooldown. Engineer could slap a propeller onto that thing and essentially make it a controllable gyro, with a damaging AoE that can be moved around like Ventari tablet can, just a bit slower. Guardian could go fully ham and use it as two-handed weapon by suspending it over its head like an actual Helio and casting God Cold, he wants to see you now, with their both now free hands. We could be here for hours listing of ideas, as I have more creativity than time and talent, and chakrams allow for a great deal of creativity with their implementation, and that's why I think they would make for a great addition to Guild Wars 2's weapon roster. Number 4. Great Flail. What you probably think when you hear of Flail is the ball on a chain version. If you're interested, historically speaking, this kind of a flail was developed for the purpose of mounted combat, because ringing someone's bell in a full gallop usually creates enough force to send your wrist the same direction the poor fella goes, towards the pearly gates. However, there's lesser known, less appreciated, more formidable, bigger brother of the humble savior of noble wrists, and ironically, it was quite the common source of peasant-inflicted noble casualties. Flail originally had its purpose as a farming implement, used to separate the grain from the air through literally giving it a beatdown. And as everything with long shaft and heavy end, in time of need it was tested as an implement to separate souls from the bodies, and it happened to fare pretty well. You see, a flail is essentially a quarterstaff with a small club attached with a chain or a rope to one of its ends. What this creates is a weapon that's extremely difficult to defend against, as even if you block the hit with the shaft, the dangly bit is still likely to swing around and bonk you in the back of the head, which you may have guessed is less than comfortable. Especially when some crafty fella got a bright idea that you may attach spikes to the dangly bit and make the back scratcher a little more spicy. As in game terms, Flail would be a two-handed weapon focusing on multi-hits, specifically attacks that hit twice, somewhat like Gunsaber auto-attacks or Maiming Spear does, but with the second hit applying different specific effects depending on a class. And this concept visually fits most classes, with pretty much only Thief, Engie and Elementalist being somewhat left out. Warrior's Flail's second hit could apply a different effect depending on whether the first attack hits the same target or not. For example, an AoE swing that deals high power damage and bleeding to targets hit by both attack, but pulls and applies heavier bleeding to targets hit only by the second attack, with second hitbox extending further than the first one. Guardian, I can see using the motive of flagellation. By making your skills 2 to 5, damage yourself and grant you empowering effect if you purposefully miss them, like Spear gets illumination but for hitting yourself. Mesmer, I'd like to see use hard CC to lock enemy down and use phantasms which deal extra damage against disabled enemies. That could lead to interesting playstyle. Necromancer I think could go in the maximize cruelty direction, with skills dealing more damage or applying CC specifically to targets suffering from specific conditions. And I'm kind of out of ideas here. Post yours in the comments if you have some. Great Flail would be a great middle ground between visuals of staff and hammer for many classes, and could lead to many interesting designs both in skins and skills department. Therefore, I think it could be a good addition to Guild Wars 2's weapon roster. Number 3. Kusarigama. Kusarigama is a peculiar weapon originating from Japan, featured most prominently as a weapon in Nioh and being wielded by Trash from League of Legends. Historically speaking, the weapon was contrived off of farming implements that were easy to conceal, carry on yourself, and dodged all and any weapon bans. There are many realistic and more fantastical interpretations to how Kusarigama was used. From things as brain-dead simple as throwing the weight at someone's face, to more advanced grappling techniques meant to impair opponent's mobility and allow for a safe takedown. But we can all agree historic Japanese weren't going to town with this like Kratos does with Blades of Chaos. That said, what's fiction for if not taking calculated liberties away from reality? I see this weapon be focused on mobility and control, with pulling yourself to the enemy or to ally or anything else, or pulling the enemies towards you, and/or attaching chains to people be on the forefront of its designs, which would fit specs like Thief, Mesmer, Ranger, Elementalist, Necromancer, Warrior and Revenant. Thief and Warrior would probably use the Kusarigama in the most cliché ways, with Thief using it to pull himself to targets and cut them down quickly, while Warrior would pull enemies towards himself for the same result. Ranger could instead have the end of the rope attached to the pet, for the ability to pull himself to his pet on a press of a button, abusing pet's mobility for his own and joining in on the party whenever pet lands CC. I see Elementalist using weight in earth by conjuring a boulder around it and smashing people with it, or in air by attaching the sickle to the enemy and electrifying the chain. While Necromancer and Revenant could take a note from Trash's design and focus respectively on disruptive and supportive aspects of it, by first using AoE attacks that attach chain to enemies, debilitating their movement and applying conditions, while other casting supportive AoEs that attach chains to allies, granting them boons and barrier. Kusarigama is probably the most unique weapon from the Far East, and potential for skins for this thing is unmatched. Weight on the chain could be pretty much anything, from lantern to skull through various ornamental mace heads, all the way to the goofy shit like live choya, pet rock or someone's severed foot. Sky is the limit in this case, and for this fact alone, I think Kusarigama deserves a mention. Number 2. Hook Cannon. I adore proto-firearms, for the simple reason that they are the very point where historic reality brushed its shoulders with fantasy. Proto-firearms gained some popularity with, for example, Kingdom Come featuring an example of one, but they were older and more prominent than the game would let you to believe. Firearms of this kind predated even Battle of Grunwald by a solid few decades, and prototypes date back to 10th century China, and only God knows when the first one was shipped to Europe and claimed its first geezer casualty. Original hand cannons look very much like just a quarter staff with about a quarter of its length being just a metal pipe. And fun fact about that is that the archetype of a wizard wielding a staff exists because of this weapon. Simply put, people who had access to hand cannons first made up bullshit stories about wizards and magic to conceal the weapon's existence, just like the Brits in World War II made up the myth about carrots improving sight to conceal the existence of radar, and hence the bullshit story explaining how people can fire smoke and brimstone from quarterstaves gave us the wizard archetype. So, say thank you to lying Frenchmen, mage gaming enjoyers. Hook cannon is an evolution of that original hand cannon. As with the weapon getting improved over time, so increased its overall weight and knockback. So eventually a hook was added so that the weapon can be braced against battlements for firing, but also it increased lethality and armor busting properties of this weapon in melee combat. And from said hook does the weapon variant take its name. In-game, the proportions of the weapon would have to be slightly exaggerated, and hook variant lends itself more gracefully to it, in my opinion, than other more staff-like versions. It should remain a polearm-like staff, but have the upper quarter of its length be a reinforced barrel of a gun, with a spike or other weapon head at the muzzle end of its barrel. In gameplay, it would be a melee-oriented weapon with ranged ability or two, sort of like Gunsaber was on release, but more carrying a spirit of a hammer as a weapon. This weapon oddly fits many classes. Elementalist could use the barrel of this weapon as a cauldron to conjure elements in, and could use the heavy bulk of this weapon to reshape the battlefield while in earth attunement. The same casting cauldron approach fits the Necromancer, but with a twist of being more melee focused, with an AoE that ports you to target location on cast like Spectre Wells do, and having a big damage melee finisher to top it off. Warrior, as I alluded to previously, would essentially just get Gunsaber done better, blasting enemies back, blasting yourself forward, heavy CC, multi-hitting AoEs akin to Dragon's Roar, and no downside of having to play Bladesworn. For Engineer, I envisioned this weapon to be more of a gun than a clobbering implement, with focus on skills that launch cluster bombs and large explosives fired from mid to long range, with only auto attacks being melee. I'd like to spitball more ideas, but due to time constraints, we have to keep moving. All I'm going to say for the end is that we're unlikely to find any other weapon with ranged potential that may feel distinct from currently available staves, bows and rifles, which makes a hook cannon worthy candidate for expanding Guild Wars 2's weapon roster. Number 1. Lantern Shield. This object of great importance cannot be described better than just a shield she tells you not to worry about, as it is simply an evolved, infinitely superior version of any small shield to grace the hand of a man with its presence. A piece of art in design, and a marvel to behold both behind museum glass and even more so in motion. Lantern Shield proves the infinite prowess of human ingenuity. Forged as a plate-shielded gauntlet hybrid, featuring strategically placed spikes and serrations for catching and trapping enemy blade in a duel, as well as to increase lethality of punches and bashes with this beauty, often also featuring prominent underhanded blade, and all that while leaving wielder's shield hand free to hold another weapon or to assist in reloading. This weapon is wonderfully designed and an enormous threat in hands of a trained fighter. But it is not where genius of its design ends. Its name, Lantern Shield, spoils the main gimmick. The weapon itself possessed in most cases a container into which a source of light could be slotted, which then shined brightly through the gaps in front of the shield, granting its wielder a source of light that he could shine forward like a flashlight, without risking he'll blind himself, but almost guaranteeing he'll blind any potential enemy. Essentially, what Blitz from Rainbow Six Siege uses his shield lamp for, but with extra spikes, like the god intended. It fills me with pride and joy, knowing that first flashlight in history was designed for murdering people. I love white man culture. It is so caring and peaceful. Lantern Shield, unfortunately, is the only weapon on this list I am not certain whether or not it should be implemented into Guild Wars 2's weapon roster, as I doubt it could be done justice within current Guild Wars 2's combat system. Definitely it couldn't be implemented with respect it deserves as a mere offhand, maybe on a thief due to their special dual wielding mechanics, but still it would have ended up much of a letdown for 8 other classes. perhaps as a dedicated main hand shield. Lantern Shield could be implemented in a way that does it justice. Jabs with any of the spikes or with the underhanded blade could do well enough for basis of auto attacks, and Shield Bash with the spike well enough for a mobility option. Add a small block, few sequence skills involving the light inside, and a big uppercut with the blade as a burst skill, and suddenly we have not too bad warrior toolset for Lantern Shield. Guardian could do mostly the same but focusing even more on the light deep within, empowering it to inflict blindness, burning and torment on the enemy. Meanwhile, Revenant could use the light inside to conjure spirits or channel mist energy, like a serrated casting focus. Engineer I see replacing the lantern inside with something akin to a chainsaw, making his auto attack an ammo dump skill like Dragon's Roar, hitting the more times the more ammo he has, and a skill 3 making him rev up the chainsaw, adding ammo to the skill 1. Mesmer could use this weapon for a long channeled flurries of jabs and long cast AoEs on both auto attack and skill 2, with skill 3 summoning a phantasm to finish channeling the skill for the player. Necro could use it as ranged defensive main hand, with a parry on skill 3 that curses whoever triggers it, no matter the range, and focus on ranged application of torment and bleeding in similar way axe hits. Thief could absolutely use at least one main hand that isn't turbo cringe, with more brawly playstyle focusing on short ports that grant barrier and momentary protection as well as high upfront damage with little to no gimmicks involved. That leaves us with just Ranger and Elementalist, where first one is difficult to speak of in this regard, as this intricate of a weapon doesn't really fit someone whose entire purpose is to look like they never left the forest and forgot how to speak their native language. While Elementalist, with the broadness of its mechanics, would take a small book to even briefly conceptualize for, in detail precise enough, not to make the whole description sound like something something big element something something. Still, I'm wholeheartedly convinced grace of heaven should not be denied to anyone, not even the savages. And despite my head going completely blank when I'm trying to think up any idea to how Ranger could use it, I still think it deserves human rights. And wielding Lantern Shield at least once in your life is definitely a basic moral and spiritual necessity covered under definition of human rights, right alongside the right to live. And still, I'm unconvinced to whether we can truly give Lantern Shield justice within the constraints of Guild Wars 2's combat systems. Perhaps it would indeed take Guild Wars 3 to make this weapon as good as it deserves to be. But hey, maybe I am wrong. Maybe you have an idea I haven't thought of. Or maybe you think I'm glazing Lantern Shield a little bit too much. I'm not glazing it enough, to be completely honest. But no matter what you want to express, discuss or call me, feel free to do so in the comments below. Also, a quick reminder, you can support me through Patreon and channel memberships. And on that note, a big sign of gratitude towards all the generous supporters continuously considering my dubious quality content worth their money. You're all truly welcome. Rapface out.